Hey, Rob. How's
Hey,
it going?
Tom.
Oh, looks like I'm having a camera issue. Give me just a second.
No worries. Take your time.
See what we got here. There we go.
All right, man.
How's
I
it
just saw you,
going?
I just saw you were on TikTok live a minute ago, and I was about to jump in there and be like, "You're in the wrong room."
Yeah, we've got people joining on the live. I'm just kind of posting it up on the TikTok live.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's see. Excellent. So for those of you joining us right now, we're waiting on Dan, and then this will be recorded. I'm going to post that in the Discord. You might be able to direct access it from YouTube. It probably give me about 24 hours to get that uploaded correctly. Let's see. Oh, Dan's trying to join.
Yeah, it took me a minute to get to join.
Okay.
So,
Hey, Dan.
Hey, how are you?
Hey, guys. You might get a little feedback. So excellent. Everyone's here. This is awesome. And then we've got blue sky timer up in the top here. That's going to be the timer for our bio break. Awesome. So we've actually got some people joining us now. This is fantastic, everyone. I appreciate everybody being here. Today, we're going to talk about the career and job hunting advice for new and junior engineers or designers. Biggest thing that I've been getting a lot of questions about is how to break into the tech industry. And me having, just short of 12 years experience, it's been a little while since I've been a junior trying to break into the field. And I know a lot has changed. And in 2021, I'm really interested to kind of lift the curtain on what that looks like, both from the recruiting side and from the HR side. So joining us are Rob, Kinsella, and Dan Space, both of whom have decades of experience in HR and recruiting all throughout the tech industry. They're going to really provide a lot of great value here. Rob's going to break into kind of making yourself a better candidate. He's going to speak to that for 30 minutes. After that point, we'll have about a 5-minute just reset, little bio break. And then after that, Dan's going to follow up with what to expect from compensation, career tracking, and he'll kind of add on to what Rob has to say. After that, we're going to use the remaining time for just a live Q&A. So if you have questions as this is going on, please feel free to drop the questions into the YouTube live. Our fantastic moderator, Alfredo, aka the Great Virtue, he's going to be fielding those questions for us. And then once we have that Q&A session, he'll send them my way. And those questions can be answered by myself. They can be directed to Rob or to Dan. But start compiling those now, and then know that at the end of the session, we will be getting to those. So Rob or Dan, do you guys have any questions?
Good to go.
Nice.
Excited to be here.
Hi, everyone.
Well, then without further
Dan,
ado,
what is his background, Dan? What is his background we've got going
I
on?
forgot if I had done this. I had set this up on Zoom a long time ago. This was like street art from Chile, I think.
That's awesome.
I figured it was better than the back of the bookcase. Yeah. I think this is from Santiago.
That's amazing.
I love that. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you, Rob, and you can take the stage.
Awesome. Yes, as Tom mentioned, my name is Rob Kinsella. I'm an executive recruiter. I work for a firm that focuses on tech, and that's a big word, but a lot of my clients are venture capital backed or private equity backed high growth companies. So lots of experience recruiting across multiple fields, including design, product management, program management, all the way up to the C level. I've worked for a multitude of different organizations and industries, including the Harvard Business School, where I worked as a program manager, PwC in a consulting practice, as well as Facebook. And then, so I've got a lot of experience in basically navigating the job search process, not only as a candidate in changing industries, but then again as a recruiter and kind of the lens of what a recruiter looks for. So most of my time is going to be focused on how does a recruiter evaluate your resume? How does a recruiter evaluate LinkedIn? And how do you utilize these tools? I'll throw in some other additional information, and then I'll kind of talk a little bit about interviewing if we have more time. Dan, are you going to talk about interviewing as well, or are we going to kind of cross over there? Dan, I think you're on mute, man.
Oh, No, I'm not focusing on interviewing. So you
Okay,
can.
yeah, I'll touch on that a little bit, and then if you have any context, and also it's worth noting, Tom, Dan, and I all know each other from TikTok. We all run successful channels that focus on different spaces. Dan and I cross over a lot in the sense of what we talk about, and we've become good friends on the platform. Highly recommend you, if you're not following all three of us, by all means to do that, as we all add a little bit of different spin and different value in the spaces that we focus on. But without further ado, let me focus on one. Your resume, because I think no matter what industry, what fields, or role that you're going into, the value of having an effective resume. And there is a lot of chatter. Dan and I talk about this all the time about what is a good resume and what does that mean, and how do actually recruiters evaluate your resume. And you can go on the internet, obviously, and do searches, and you'll get a variety of different opinions on what is an effective resume. The biggest thing that I would take away from it is there's a lot of conversation about what like a resume writer will tell you, and then there's actually what a recruiter will tell you, because recruiters evaluate resumes in a matter of seconds, and that's an important lens that we need to evaluate when we think about those resumes. Tom, am I able to share my screen?
Yeah, you should be able to. Give it a shot.
Great. Give me 1 second, everybody. I'm going to basically pull up a couple of different resumes, and I want to walk through why they're important. We don't have a ton of time, so it'll be kind of a quick overview, if you will. Tom, can you confirm for me that you can see that resume?
Right now, I can see a black shared screen, no resume.
All right, let's try that again then. Hold on 1 sec. What if I go desktop?
Now I see. Now I see your full window. Yep, I'm seeing everything you've got pulled up.
Perfect. That's what I want. All right, we're going to go to this first resume right here. And then if I scroll down, does the resume move for you guys?
Yep.
Great. Sometimes Word can be a little challenging with Zoom. So a couple of things that I want to call out. With design folks, I often hear I need to have a very design-focused resume. It needs to have intricate details of how I think about design and pop, whether that's different colors or logos or things that'll stand out, if you will. The reality is there's two things that I want you to consider in that aspect. One, most organizations are using what's called an application tracking system. There's a variety of different functions that come into this system. I don't want to spend too much time into it, but what I would take away from it is some of those systems will scan your resume and parse out the content that's in your resume. And when you utilize an over-designed resume, that can be then challenging for scanning and those kind of things. So I highly, highly recommend sticking with a very simplistic resume. A single column, as you can see here, is ideal. And what I would really focus on is how to get somebody to either go to, like in this case, you can see an example here. This is a designer who has a personal website. So they've invested in building a location where their design elements, whether that be websites or apps or other kind of design materials that live somewhere that a recruiter can very quickly click on that and then get a full scope of what your design kind of aesthetic or experience is. But when it comes to the actual resume, simple and clean is actually going to be more effective. And I recognize that's counterintuitive, but it is actually a reality. I often tell people I've never interviewed somebody because their resume, was a certain color or had a certain font to it, right? And so just keep that in mind. And I recognize that's a little bit counterintuitive. So a couple of things that I want to call out that I think are really interesting. One, again, it's a very simplistic and clean resume. You can tell at the top here, it's really just focusing on, your LinkedIn profile, contact information, in this case, a portfolio. A very subtle but important detail is this idea of kind of branding your experience, right? So in this case, it's marketing and design professional, right? And you can kind of brand yourself whatever you feel your expertise may be, whether it's engineering, whether it's product, whether it's design. But this actually sets the tone of your resume of how I should be thinking about your experience and the value that you can bring to the organization or to the role. And it's a very subtle thing, but it actually has a pretty massive impact, if you will. A lot of times you will see people, or there's a lot of advice, Dan, you know what I'm about to say, from career services and other organizations about putting like a objective statement or a summary at the top of your resume. I highly recommend not doing that, especially an objective statement. It adds really no value. We know what the objective is. It's that you want to work here, you want that job. And so honestly, recruiters don't read those. And so I highly recommend that you don't invest in creating one of those. if you're doing a career change or a massive, kind of shift in your industry, that can be super valuable. But at the most part, most people don't read them. So again, I don't recommend doing it. I recommend going right into the most important part of your resume. That can be your experience. That could be your education. That could be projects or programs that you worked on. But those things should be at the top of your resume to get people's attention really, really quickly. A couple of things, if you have followed me on TikTok or you do end up following me on TikTok, in about a week of following me, you will know that I talk about things about resumes a lot, and I talk about what's called a results-driven resume. If there is any takeaway that you have from my conversation about resumes, it's about this idea of focusing on the results that you can drive. You'll notice, hopefully you can see some of these bullet points, but this person did a great job of articulating the value of her work. I know it says my name on it, but I did that to mask the person. What she's done here is outlined when she did something, it drove value for the business, whether that was driving more sales, more traffic to the website, making something more efficient. I believe we have a lot of design folks here on the call or on the Zoom, and I would recommend thinking about projects that you've worked on, whether in school or in a job, and what was the value of those individual projects, right? So when you designed something, was it to enhance the user experience? Was it to increase conversions? Was it to improve efficiency from a time perspective? But all of the things that you've done actually have some kind of result, and it doesn't have to be quantitative. It can very much be qualitative. But what you want to do is take the lens of, when you're creating your resume, almost, I would say, 70 to 80% of your bullet points should be focused on what you did and the value that drove. And it sounds very easy and obvious when I say it out loud, but it can be kind of difficult for folks to do. But I highly encourage you to take the time to think about, when I did this activity, it drove a result. And hopefully, again, you can see some of these bullet points, but she's done a really good job of articulating the value of what she's been able to do. There's really 4 core sections to your resume that you need to focus on. The first one here is professional experience. If you don't have experience, if you're a student and you don't have an internship, you could put project-based work here, something you've done in class or outside of class, even personal projects. You have your education down here on the bottom, and you have your skills. These are really the core sections that you need. You could add a few more sections, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that. But honestly, at the end of the day, the 3 most important things you need to outline are your professional experience, your education, and your skills. You could add interest or activities, but honestly, Dan and I have both talked about this. Unless you have something really unique or interesting from an activity perspective, it's probably not going to stand out. It's probably not going to add a ton of value to your resume. So I encourage you just to focus on the core things that you have. Again, your experience, your education, and your skills. Let me stop sharing for 1 second. I'm going to show you guys a different resume. Nope, that's not it. Give me 1 second. Hey, Tom, if you can just give me a thumbs up that you can see my screen.
Yep, you're good.
Let me know. Great, thank you. Just want to show you another example really quickly for those that are students. So you should see a second resume here. Now, in this case, the person led with education. If you've recently graduated, leading with education is absolutely recommended, especially if your coursework is directly aligned to what you're going into. In the previous resume that we looked at, the person had experience already, so they led with that experience. In this case, the person didn't have a ton of experience, so they led with education. They led with relevant coursework. This is a great opportunity to let a recruiter know very quickly the different courses that you took and the actual skills that you took from those courses and how they can apply ideally to the role that you're going into. In addition, this person put software and hardware skills. Those are obviously very valuable for that particular industry. So if I'm a recruiter, on average, I spend about 10 seconds on your resume very quickly without even getting into actual experience. I understand the value of your education, the courses that you've taken, and the software and hardware that you actually have hands-on experience with, which is extremely valuable for me to understand very, very quickly. Now, this person didn't have a lot of quote-unquote work experience. They are a student. They didn't have a lot of internships. So they focused on actual projects and broke that out by projects that they led and then additional projects. I think this is a missed opportunity by a lot of students. They don't realize or take the time to evaluate projects that they've worked on and apply those to their resume, because those can be extremely valuable. They are hands-on experience, specifically in design and in engineering and in product management. A lot of the courses that you take are very hands-on. They're not always just theoretical. They are, building something or designing something. So I encourage, if you don't have an internship, if you don't have a lot of work experience, or even if you do and there's a very specific project that's valuable, that's a value add, then include that on your resume like you see here. And then again, they've got their actual job on the bottom there. But again, that's the least valuable thing for this person's resume because it's not directly correlated to the field that they want to be in. So Dan talks about this all the time. Think about your resume as the most important thing goes on the top and work your way down, if you will, to the least most important thing. I know we're going to do Q&A at the end, so hopefully if anybody has any more questions on resumes, I can certainly answer those. I'll give one more that I'm going to show really quickly because I think it's a good example of one other attribute. Let's see here, resume number 3.
And that's good.
So, yep, thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. This is a very similar resume. I want to just call out something that I think is really well done and could be very interesting from a design perspective, and that is they put their skills down at the bottom here, and they highlighted basically the skill and then the tool that they used to then effectively do that skill. So graphic designer, Adobe Illustrator. And I think this is a really great way to connect the dots of you were looking for this skill as well as this software or something else that I utilize to do that. And this really connects the dots for a recruiter very quickly. I could even argue that these skills could have been placed at the top of the resume. That is a little bit of a choice on that person. But I think this is a nice example outside of just listing your skills, but like how you utilize those skills. And again, from a design or an engineering perspective, this can paint a very quick and effective picture for you. So a couple of other things that I get questions about all of the time is how long should my resume be? This is a common question. The short answer is content is more important than the length of your resume, meaning if you actually have relevant experience or relevant information that you need to share and it goes beyond a page, that's okay. With that said, I would tell you that the kind of industry standard is less than 5 years of work experience. Try to stick to 1 page. And again, that's not a hard and fast rule, but more of a recommendation than anything else. Again, content is going to be more important than the actual, length and those kind of things. I've never said I'm not going to interview for this person because they get me 2 pages instead of 1. But do recognize that, on average, a recruiter reviews your resume. I can sit down and read 200 resumes in an hour, right? And so you want to make it as efficient and as effective as possible so I can get a good understanding of your experience and ideally, reach out to you and schedule a call. Okay, so I'm going to switch it over. So that's from a resume perspective. And I think, if you can develop a simple single column resume that's results driven and articulates the things that we talked about, that's going to be extremely valuable for you when it comes to just applying for jobs. And that is obviously something you need to focus on. And so your resume is what I would call like you're proactively utilizing your resume to apply for roles. And you should be the 3 job boards that I recommend the most are Indeed, LinkedIn, and ZipRecruiter are the 3 job boards or job functionalities that I recommend the most. We're going to talk about LinkedIn because I think it's the most important one, but your resume is what I would define as your proactive tool that you use to go and apply to those roles. Now, LinkedIn can be proactive, but it's also reactive. And that means that if you have a really good LinkedIn profile, recruiters can find you as opposed to you finding them. And so I want to highlight a couple of attributes that I think will really help you when it comes to building a LinkedIn profile that can be successful. So let me share my screen again really quickly. Go here. I pulled up a couple of profiles really quickly that I think have some really good attributes to them. Tom, can you see Ashley's profile?
Yep.
Cool. So a couple of things about your LinkedIn profile. Hopefully most people know what LinkedIn is and are somewhat familiar with it, but these are going to be some tips and tricks to help you along the way, whether again, you're utilizing your LinkedIn profile to proactively apply or reactive in the sense that you have a really strong profile where ideally recruiters or hiring managers are coming to you and saying, hey, I'm really interested in your experience. The best way to think about your LinkedIn profile is like it's a web page and think about SEO, search engine optimization. And so what I mean by that is, as a recruiter, I go into the LinkedIn Recruiter platform and I type in titles or keywords to then find people. And so, again, it's very similar to search engine optimization or a website page, where the more words that you have relevant to what I would be searching for, the better chance you have of being found. And again, it sounds very simple when I say that, but it's often overlooked. And I think people miss opportunities to add content or keywords to their platform or to their LinkedIn profile that are going to be valuable. And then you've got aesthetic and you've got some other kind of qualitative things that we'll talk about that kind of improve your profile collectively, which help, I think, from a whole kind of user experience when people are looking at different profiles. So let's take Ashley, for instance. One really quick kind of qualitative thing is she has a headshot, she has a photo, which is, I think, kind of table stakes for LinkedIn and highly recommended. I think there's a stat out there from LinkedIn that people that have photos are 32 times more likely to be messaged by recruiters than people that don't have photos. So obviously encourage you to do that. Behind her headshot is a cover photo. Again, this is more of an aesthetic, qualitative part of the profile, but I think it is valuable to have something there, create kind of a unique experience and not kind of a bland, blank page, if you will. So encourage you to kind of do a quick Google search. You can find free LinkedIn banners and those kind of things. Next thing I want to call out really quickly is her headline. Dan and I have done multiple. Dan, I saw you were doing all LinkedIn content this week. We both talk about LinkedIn profiles a lot. Right below her name is what LinkedIn calls your headline. And so a couple of things that I would recommend around your headline. One, having your title is important, again, from a keyword search perspective, but you can add additional content to your headline beyond your title. So in Ashley's case, she kind of talks about what she's an expert in. And so she gives additional information right at the top of her page, so that it gives you, gives me as a recruiter the opportunity to be like, do I want to continue scrolling down? Is this somebody that I'm interested in? If she's commenting on someone's post in LinkedIn, I can see her headline. So it gives me visibility even when I'm not on her page on not only what her title is, but maybe the value that she can bring to an organization, which can be super important. Also, again, from a keyword perspective, so if you're a UI UX designer and you have experience in mobile applications, having that in your headline is extremely valuable, not only from a keyword perspective, but also as soon as I land on your page, I have more visibility into what you do or what you can do. Speaking of keywords, if you look here at her About section, she has really filled this out to give you a fair amount of information, but it's also pretty succinct and easy to skim and read, which is extremely valuable for me as a recruiter. But she does a good job of articulating kind of beyond her resume the value of her experience and what she's an expert at. She also puts her skills in here, which is something I highly recommend and I don't see a lot of people do in their About section, is basically cutting and pasting that skills part on your resume and including this in here. Again, this will improve your chances with keywords. If I'm looking for somebody that has a specific skill set and I type it in like Adobe Creative Suite as a skill or a software that I want to hire against, that's going to be extremely valuable for me. And then this is a section here called the featured section, which is right here. This is a really underutilized section. You can add links, attachments, videos, almost anything actually, I think from an asset perspective right here. So if you're a designer, you can include actual design elements that you've put together, web pages that you've worked on. If you're an engineer, you could put your GitHub here or other projects that you've worked on. If you don't have any projects or products that you've worked on, you could put like industry news here, things that are relevant for your industry. This gives you an opportunity to speak to the user about your expertise, your work, or your knowledge. And it's very underutilized by folks on LinkedIn. It's actually a newer feature, but I highly, highly recommend. You can actually include multiple assets. In Ashley's case, she's showing to her audience here that she understands her industry very well by including an article in there. But I highly encourage you to incorporate any work that you've done, projects. If you're a student, often I see people put like something from their school or like their individual degree program. Maybe it's in the news or there's industry information. So I highly encourage you to utilize that section. And then under your experience, where I see a massive experience or massive gap in LinkedIn profiles is under experience, where people don't fill this out as much as you would your resume. If you're actively looking for a role, I encourage you to include as much information from your resume into your LinkedIn profile. Again, if we go back to this idea of your LinkedIn page being searchable by keywords, this is going to increase your chances with keywords. But overall, like those are the core functions. Hey, Dan, is there anything that you would add really quickly from a LinkedIn profile perspective without getting too much of the details?
No, I think you pretty much covered everything.
Cool. Appreciate it. I think LinkedIn to me is, or to actually pretty much everybody on this, Dan and Tom and I would all probably agree, is that LinkedIn is probably the most powerful tool from a job search perspective that is out there on the market. One, you can apply for roles directly, so you can be proactive with applying to roles with your resume and your LinkedIn profile. You can be reactive, again, if you've invested the time in all the tools that we talked about today. Ideally, recruiters are reaching out to you. And then number three is this is probably the largest networking platform that's out there, where you can engage with people through a multitude of different connections. The most common one that I would recommend for students, and let me see if I can just pull it up really quickly here. Yep, perfect. So one of the things that I highly recommend is if you're new to LinkedIn and you're a student or you're a young professional and you're just kind of getting your feet underneath you from a LinkedIn perspective, there are so many great tools, but there's one that I want to focus on really quickly, and it's low-hanging fruit for you. So let's just say you're a recent graduate and you want to start networking with people that are, product designers, right? And so what you can do is you can go up into their search engine, you can type in product designers, it will pull up a ton of people. But over in the bottom right-hand corner right here, you can see I typed in as a filter, I use this filter right here. And then on the bottom right, I typed in Syracuse University, which is where I went to school. And then I can click this filter, and now it'll show me only all product designers that went to Syracuse University. And so I can reach out to these folks with pretty low-hanging fruit, right? I'm a recent Syracuse alumni. I'm starting to get out into the field. I'm very interested in product design. I'd love to know what your journey was like. How did you decide your first role? Those kind of things. And these folks, I'm not going to guarantee everybody on LinkedIn that, went to your school is going to respond to your messaging, but it often is a great opportunity to start to networking. And the value of networking is, one, learning. How did other people do this before me? Ideally, maybe getting introductions or getting some education about different companies that you want to work for or directions that you want to go. But utilizing LinkedIn as a resource to navigate the industry that you want to be in or that you are in is probably the best tool out there that we understand or that we know. I want to be sensitive of time. Tom, we have about 3 more minutes, right? Are we taking a break at 3:30?
We'll take a break. If you've got some more things, we can maybe go about 5 minutes over. So 1:35, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, if I was going to summarize things, one, having a very simplistic results-driven resume that is very easy to skim and read for a recruiter and articulate the value that you can bring is one of the most important things that you can do in your job search. Investing in LinkedIn and treating it as you would any kind of website or web page where somebody is going to be searching and you understand what that looks like is extremely important. And then utilizing LinkedIn as a fantastic networking tool that you can tap into very quickly to educate yourself and get navigating around the different industry or job function that you're thinking about. The last thing I would say, and I don't have a ton of time, but I want to emphasize a couple of quick points about interviewing. No matter what role you're interviewing for, I think there's a couple of things that are extremely important. One is to prepare. And with LinkedIn, you have this great opportunity to really do as much preparation as possible in understanding who you're interviewing with, where do they come from, how long have they been with the organization. But as a recruiter, I can tell very, very quickly when somebody has prepared for an interview or has not prepared for an interview. And I think it's incredibly impactful for you to spend a little bit of extra time to do research on the organization, the people, the job function, who's maybe been in the role before. All of those extra minutes that you spend on the prep will be extremely valuable. When it comes to the actual interview, there's one thing that I think I often see folks miss, especially early, younger professionals, and that is connecting the value that you can bring to the role. And that is understanding the experiences that you have, whether they be school, work, projects, or additional work that you've done, and tying those experiences and those education to the value to the role. A lot of times we just respond to questions and hope that they're the right answers, but really connecting those dots of this is what I've done and this is how I want to add value to the role and to the organization is where you're going to add the most, you're going to have the most impact. And really focusing on that, the value that you can bring as opposed to the value you're going to get from the role. right? And if you can put that value-based approach to how you think about interviewing, that'll increase your chances exponentially when it comes to that. I do a lot of interviewing content. I definitely encourage you to follow me on TikTok. I do a ton about what interview questions to ask, how to respond to specific interview questions. Dan does the same thing. We both have extensive experience in this. So from a timing perspective, I don't want to go too much into a rabbit hole of different interview questions, but I do encourage you to look at both of our pages for additional interview advice. So Tom set up time. So at the end of this, we will have a Q&A. So I'm happy to answer questions about resume, LinkedIn, or interviewing, but hopefully that was a quick and helpful session in less than 30 minutes.
Fantastic. Yes. Oh, the camera's doing camera things again. One sec. Yeah, so that was great. I I really appreciate that. And I know that I see a lot of questions coming in right now. There we go. Yeah, I see a lot of questions coming in right now. So know that we are fielding those questions. We're gonna be getting to a lot of those near the end here. We're gonna take a quick 5-minute just reset, and then we'll come back. And at that point, we're gonna hear from Dan. So go ahead and bear with us for a sec. I'm gonna put a timer up, and then we'll be back in just a moment. All right. Awesome. Let me get rid of that here. Cool. So we took a little break. I think my camera's still loading up here. Little technical issues on this first event. That's all right. We're working through it. I appreciate everybody attending right now. This is awesome. We've got a lot of great questions. Next up, we're going to have Dan speaking to the other half of this. I'm really excited about this turnout. This has turned out really fantastic. So just know that if you're asking a question right now, Virtue is in the YouTube live. He is taking those questions. He'll be sending them our way at the end of this. And then we'll be able to answer those. So go ahead and continue asking those questions. And Dan, I will turn this over to you. And if there's any screen sharing issues, I'll call them out. Otherwise, if you don't hear from me, everything's good.
Okay, hi everyone. Huge thanks to Tom for inviting me to this. Huge thanks to everyone to listening to me babble. And I love Rob and everything that he said. I'm going to try and demonstrate my technical idiocy here, but let's see. Can I get a confirmation that you are seeing a PowerPoint?
PowerPoint, good.
All right, great. So let's talk about gifts and design. And there we go. So who am I? I'm Daniel Space. I've worked in HR for about 20 years. I started with Children's Place. I've worked with WebMD, American Express, EA Games, and most recently as Spotify as an HR business partner. I'm also a huge video game nerd. I'm a sugar addict. I'm a data geek, and I am a very bad designer. I have decided to do this presentation, and whenever you see the symbol, it means I know I could have done something that you geniuses see, but I just don't have the ability to do it. So I thought I would start with design as it relates to when I first realized the concept of design and realizing I do not have the skills that you do. I was 8 years old. I went on a school trip. We were taught how to paint. I kept adding color after color after color after color until it was a big mess. And the artist teacher said, at some point you have to know how to stop. And I do not have that skill. So I realized I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. And I realized I was very bad at design, but I came to appreciate it. And I have where I would say we need a word kind of like between admiration and worship for designers. Because to me, the level of appreciation, the adoration, the respect that I have to people who see the world through design cannot be understated. I basically think that you see the world in ways that I would kill for, not literally. I am so inspired and appreciative of all of the things that you do, the way that you can see things and the way that you move perspectives. You never get the credit that you deserve, and you make the world a better place. But why? And that's not a dramatic, but why? Because what you do is you see the world in a perspective that allows you to make it better for other people, whether or not it's through art, through construction, through architecture, through graphic design, user design, clothing, creative design, web design, what have you. Designers have a very unique skill set and a very amazing gift that they can take something and say, how can I make this better for other people? How can I make this more enjoyable? Essentially, you turn exchanges into experiences. You bring magic into the world, and I can't ever underestimate that enough. Please never devalue that. Never ever let yourself be taken advantage of from that. You bring magic into the world because you turn exchanges into experiences. So now what do you do with your gift? You can do, things for self-purpose, like, okay, this is self-fulfilling for me. You can give it to friends, you can give it to loved ones, you can give it to family members, but you also have to pay bills. And companies will pay a lot of money for this. So what do you do with that gift to make sure that you can make enough money as well as to fulfill career development and making sure that you feel like you have a good impact in the world? So now we talked about your gift. Let's talk about my gift. My gift is not to be a designer. I cannot do this at all, as very evidenced through this PowerPoint. But I have a really unique ability to take very complex things and I understand them very easily. And then I can take that and make other people understand it really easily. And so it seemed very natural that I worked in HR, because HR, when we're not plotting ways to not be your friend or screwing over employees, what we're really doing is essentially organizational design. What we're doing is seeing how the business operates, how all the different families like marketing, sales, tech, finance, legal, all work together to have the company profit so that they can then reward their employees most of the time. So let's combine these gifts. Let's take your ability to see the world through a different perspective and my ability to understand complex systems like corporations and have you bring your wonderful talent into that so that you can get paid for it. So as Rob had spoken about, and really huge shout out again to Rob, he has such great content, especially as it relates to first job search. And this is all stuff we do not do a good job of teaching, but really understanding how to utilize your skills and your talents as a way to make income and revenue cannot be understated. And with this unique skill that you have that you can bring to the table, corporations will pay you a lot about it. And with money, of course, you can do all these things that we all need for. I can't reiterate enough, please never, ever feel bad for wanting to be paid for your skill, for your design, for your experiences. This is your labor, this is your art. There are a lot of ruthless, a lot of bad-seated people who don't understand that even though you have this incredible skill and talent, it should not be exploited. Exposure is not a form of currency, and never feel bad for saying, I can do this thing for you, but here is my amount. Or how much is your budget so I can do this thing for you? Because that is your skill, that is your value, and please never let anyone take that away from you. So now as it relates to corporations, one of the things that I can do is build corporations and corporate structures. So as it relates to a designer of any type, whether or not it's a graphic designer, UX designer, or creative designer, essentially what we have are two different levels. One is what's called the individual contributor, and this means that you work on your own. This means your manager kind of gives you a little bit of general guidance, but you're essentially acting on that. And there is a good standard, what I call job progression with designer, that with more experience, with more value with tools, with more knowledge of how to utilize the tools to craft your art further, to make it faster, to make it better, you can then kind of climb up the ladder as it relates to going from a designer to rather an associate designer, a senior designer, a lead designer, to a principal designer. Typically, we don't like to assign like a year's of experience worth, but essentially like starting from the associate designer, this is normally like the 0 to 1 year, 2 to 5 years, 5 to 7, 7 to 10, and then the 10 plus. Or if you feel like you have an instinct to manage people, you can then look at as it relates to manager. And this means that instead of doing the design work itself, you're instead condensing and synthesizing all of your information for design and how that corporation views design to give that to the designers to have them execute upon. So as a standard organization structure of what a design department looks like, especially within a tech company, you'll typically have a product design manager who focuses on product design with several designers that are targeted to either specific products or specific regions. The UX design manager, of course, is based really on that experience that the person has as they're interacting with whatever technical platform. The creative lead is all about like the brand and the marketing elements and those elements of design. And then the design operations management as relates to just making sure that all of the bills get paid, making sure that all the projects get done, making sure that all of the designers have the tools that they need so that they can focus on their art and on their gift. So now it talks about where. One of the things I can't state enough is that things will always be in shift. Things are always changing. And about up to 10 years ago or so, design was considered one of the lowest paying roles. It didn't have a lot of job security. It didn't have a lot of value. And it exploded in 2009 to 2010 or so. And so we started to see a huge increase of desire and need for UX design, creative design, clothing design, all of these different elements. So you are entering a job market, or you are participating in a job market that is very, very much in your favor. It is very, very low supply while very high demand. So you actually have the ability to try and choose the type of design that you want to get into. One of the most disappointing things that I've seen within my HR career is people who took the job 10 to 15 years ago. They never really liked what it was they did. If they just took it to pay the bills, so they're essentially designing brochures for an electric company in one case, but she never really had a chance to leave and do something that she really liked to do. So I don't want you to be in that position. I would love for you to be able to take a moment, reflect, and say, I'm really moved by books. I'm really moved by video games. I'm really interested in crypto. I love tech. And try to get into the industry that actually inspires you, because most of us, unless we're independently wealthy or bought Bitcoin in 2005, have to work. And there actually is an element to being self-fulfilled if you do something that you love. And getting paid for it on top of that is just an added bonus. So by being able to focus on an industry, the type of company, or the location that you want to do your design work, that you want to bring your gift into, you actually have a great deal of leisure that a lot of other people do not have. So one of the things as it talks about compensation and working in HR and dealing with compensation, there's so many fundamental missteps that people have and fundamental misunderstandings as it relates to compensation. And so as it relates to how you increase your compensation, there's generally like 5 different matrices. One, of course, is job level. The higher up you get, the more money you get. 2 is like location. Obviously, bigger cities are going to pay more than smaller cities. 3 is the type of company. 4 is the industry. And then 5th is the hidden one, which is industry to job family alignment. What you want to do in order to maximize revenue is to work for a company that values design, that places its high priority on design elements. These are just general trends. Of course, you'll always find exceptions, but within my experience and within all the data that I've had, you'll typically find the highest pay, the best career development, the best exposure to be, not exposure, I'm sorry, the best skill development rather, to be within these industries. These tend to place a very high value on design. And again, whether or not it's graphic, art, creative, structural, architectural, what have you, but the tech industry, fashion industry, entertainment, media, pharma, retail, leisure, video games, will normally try to pay at top dollar. They consider the design elements to be very critical and they will pay a very high amount for those skills. On the left-hand side, government, education, legal, and a jerk named Steven who'd never paid his designers. So now I do obviously want to talk directly about money, about compensation, and about salaries, especially for those of you who don't understand how corporations work. We do a very terrible job of explaining this throughout school, so it's understandable that people have a lot of questions, but essentially when you decide to join a job, the company says, you're going to do this for us, and in exchange, we're going to give you money. So what you want to try to do is try to maximize this, right? So the idea is to look for the general trends that increase your potential to gain more compensation. Again, going for companies in larger cities, and especially as 2020 and 2021 has demonstrated, you do not have to be in the office to do your job well. So if you're somewhere not within a metro city, applying to roles that are at least headquartered in bigger cities will lead to much higher salaries. Go for companies that value best design, especially based on those industries that I spoke to, and with that special focus again of that job family to industry alignment. So as you're thinking about a potential career, as you're thinking about the job market, as you're thinking about how to get into the job market and how to develop within a designer, my favorite thing is when someone is making very conscientious decisions for their career development. And they're not like the friend that I'd spoken to before. She's worked 17 years. She's now a creative director for an electric company. So all of her skills and beauty and wonder for art, she's dedicated to a company that does not have a high valuation for that job family. And she has never really felt that fulfilled. So I want, especially as this new generation comes, who's far more informed than we are, to be able to take a moment to reflect, to say, you know what, I really like this type of company. I really like this type of industry. I really like what this mission statement does. One of the best ways to do that is a lot of research, as Rob had mentioned before, on LinkedIn, to utilize just some of the search features for like associate designer or designer, read some of the job descriptions at some of the bigger companies, just reflect on what it is they're asking and see whether or not that seems to be valuable or interesting to you. So I would have to say, if the idea is to try to make as much money as possible, UX design in tech is the highest rated field. It generally pays about what we call 88% against the market average. So it pays about 38% above what most company pays. UX design in tech is one of the hottest job markets there are right now. A lot of companies are willing to pay up to, like I said, 88 to 98% above the market range, because they need people that have your very unique skill set. Fintech is right against that, entertainment as well. Fashion, of course, is hit or miss, but generally speaking, fashion will always pay designers really well. And then experience-based design. So things like theme parks or events, again, once the world reopens. As it relates to looking for career opportunities, and it can be especially difficult if you've never utilized LinkedIn, but as Rob had said, this is where most corporations play. This is where all companies that participate in our capitalist society will post their open roles. So having a presence on LinkedIn is going to be critical. You want to make sure that you can be found through passive search. You want to make sure that you have a good network of designers within your own network so that they can post openings, that you can share trends, you can share best practices, look through the UX job descriptions, and spend some time adding, just in that job search feature, UX design recruiters, and just connect with them. As this will not only build your network, it increases your eyeballs to others. It essentially allows you to tap into their network, and then you can kind of help curate your experience on LinkedIn to focus just on the elements of designers that mean the most to you. And as a personal thing, I'm trying to kind of like launch my business. And as like I've said, I'm a terrible designer. I love designers and how they see the world. I can't do it. Please connect with me. I have so many designers within my network. I'm more than happy to help facilitate introductions. I'm more than happy to hire people if they can help me with my social media and whatnot. But this is just to say, this is an amazing time to be a designer. You have skills and values and a way of perspective that I wish I could have. And as you enter the workforce, please do not undervalue yourself. And I am very apparently quicker on time than I thought I would.
Excellent. No, that's great. Okay. Well, then give me just a sec here. I'm going to move some things around. We've got a lot of great questions, actually. So this will be a great Q&A session as well. Here we go. Hey. Awesome. Virtue, if you want to shoot over some of those questions and we'll start taking them. Boop, boop, boop. Here we go. Yeah, thanks, guys, again. This is fantastic. The information's huge. I saw someone, and I'll just pick this question out because, Dan, you were going through a list of the different the different kind of structures of what you're seeing in design roles, and you put UX as the top. Someone was asking, what role do UX designers have in fashion? And I think maybe that just deserved like clarification, right? You were talking about fashion designers.
Sure. So it's two different things. One is whether or not they're a storefront retail operator, like what does that experience look like? But if you go into like a premier brand name, user experience is doing everything from how the colors look to how the floors look, the architecture of the store, as well as most premier retailers also do, they do all their transactions online. And so the user experience would be the ability, what it looks like, what it feels like when you go onto a website, how does the purchasing go? Does it have a cart mentality? Does it remind you for things? So all of those elements all tie back into commerce.
Yeah, I would echo the commerce part, especially like there's a rise in what's called like direct to consumer brands. So fashion brands or retail brands that are going straight to consumers. They're not building a traditional brick and mortar. And to Dan's point, the user experience that happens on a mobile app or a web page has even exponentially more value or is more important because they're not able to extrapolate revenue or customers from a brick and mortar. And so I've seen the direct to consumer brands, the need for a strong UX designer is just is amazing. And Dan really hit it out of the park when he talked about like the supply and demand part of this is that, and what he means by supply and demand is there are more organizations that need strong UX designers than there are UX designers available with industry or product knowledge. And so that's where you get the back and forth and why you can then start to negotiate a better compensation because, there's less of you than they need.
Excellent. All right, I've got a great list of questions here. And so I'm going to run through these kind of in the order they came. So speaking a little bit to you, Rob, Geet Patel asks, what to put as experience on resumes if you do not have experience, except for some of the design projects? What's the best way to kind of format that?
Yeah, and I think the design projects you want to almost treat your design projects as like you would a role on your resume. I think one of the first or second resumes I put up there only had projects, right? And so kind of formulating it almost like as that is your work experience. So like, let's just say you're like, I'm doing a UX project for a mobile app. Like you would just put that as your title, right? Like UX project mobile app, and then kind of bullet out almost like you would job experience and articulate as much of the hands-on that you did and treat it that way. And that is not uncommon in design work. So it's not like you're at a disadvantage, if you will, right? A lot of student resumes or young professionals utilize that functionality or utilize that skill.
And Danny asks, how much do skills on your resume affect your on ATS?
That's a good question. I mean, it really depends, what the person is asking or Danny's asking from an ATS perspective is some recruiters will put in like basically like a conditional logic or keywords that they're looking for in your resume. So let's just say somebody's like, I'm looking for somebody that has Adobe Creative Suite, which I recognize is probably table stakes, but as an example, they could put that in there and that could be part of the search functionality. To be honest with you, most recruiters that I know aren't using those search functionalities as much or those keywords. They're just scanning your resume. But I do think it makes it very easy for me, especially when I am doing like design or products, where it's like, I know that if I look at your resume and I'm like, okay, at a quick glance, it looks like you've held the role or you have the experience. Let me just double check to make sure you have the technical part by making it super easy for me to go right to your skill section and do a quick check the mark, Adobe Creative Suite, check, we're good to go, is extremely valuable. So even taking the ATS out of it for a second, it's still really important to make it super easy for the recruiter to check the box on any technical requirements.
And isn't it better to have skills located at the top of your resume? Samia asks.
It all depends, I think, on your experience and what role you're in. Dan, please jump in here as well on your thoughts. I think with the technical attributes of a design and engineering, it doesn't hurt to have it on the top, especially if you have less experience, right? Because that is the kind of the value, right? Like you've utilized Adobe Creative Suite in school. That's a really good core functionality. You should put that, where it's important. However, if you have real hands-on experience, meaning in a job or an internship, I still think you should put that first. But there is probably a flip of the coin there.
I would agree. I think experience comes first, unless you spent so much time doing the skills, then that should come first. But ultimately, it's not going to matter that much one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, we're splitting hairs here, to be honest with you, because at the end of the day, if you have the experience or you have the skills, it's a matter of me finding it on your resume. But that goes back to the idea of like a simple, clean one-page resume. Like, don't make me go searching for it, right? Like, don't make it difficult. I did a video the other day about this, like a 2-column resume. You see this often, like these 2 columns where it breaks out the sections. It sounds kind of silly, but like, don't make a recruiter go find which section to look for in your resume. Just make it top to bottom, very simple and easy to skim and read.
And Ryan Bertani, and by the way, hey Ryan, how's it going? Asks, what about awards? What role do those have on your resume?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think I would put those kind of in the section of I would definitely put them at the bottom of your resume for like 90% of the time. I'd say put them at the bottom of your resume, unless it's like a really big industry award that I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good example here, but otherwise I would put it down like you have experience, skills, awards, education, right? In that order, if you have work experience. But basically the short answer is put it near your skills, or actually sometimes people would put those in the same category or the same section. It's like skills, certificates, and awards, or certificates and awards can be one section.
And speaking of skills, Jessica, she was asking, what level of proficiency should you have if you're going to list a skill on your resume?
That is a good question. I'm sure there's people that probably stretch that sometimes, right? And in the sense of, I've been in there, I've taken a class that where we utilized that. I think my answer would be you need to be able to back it up. Meaning, like, if you're going to put that on there, and that's a part of the requirement of the job, I'll just keep using Adobe Creative Suite as an example here. If you know that software is going to be a core function of the day-to-day, if you put it on your resume, you better be able to back it up. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble, because you're going to get in there and they're going to have an expectation that you do it and that you can utilize it. So I think you need to be comfortable with the idea that if that software is going to be utilized, you can back it up.
And I agree with that. And I just want to add that when I've put skills on my resume, I don't try to saturate it with all the skills I have that might be like secondary skills. I do try to aim specifically at what the job seems to be asking of me. So sometimes that means leaving out some things that I do feel like I'm proficient in, that might be nice to have, that maybe I can speak to in person. But for the resume, I sometimes kind of leave those out.
Yeah, and remember, your resume is I think of your resume as like a really good trailer to the movie, right? So like you want to get my attention, you want to touch on the key elements that I need to understand as a recruiter. But to your point, like I don't need every detail of thing you've ever done. I need to know the core stuff that's relevant, but like treat it almost as like a really big, really long trailer, and like get me on the phone is what you're trying to do. Get me in the seat of the movie.
So for resumes, if someone has a long list of programming languages, what expectation is their proficiency of those language? So, that's kind of a tailor. Yeah, go ahead.
Same question. No, I think it's the same with the one we just covered. I think it's the same answer I would give. You need to be able to back it up.
And Samia asks, in regards to the single column versus the 2 columns, she's using 2 columns right now. Should she change that?
I would, for 2 reasons. One, it's rare. Some of the more modern ATSs are just taking pictures of your resume and are okay with it. Some of the older ATSs will kind of scan your resume and parse that information out into like subsections. And when you have those 2 columns, you're basically creating sections, and sometimes the ATS can't read left to right, right? And Dan talks about this all the time, and this is more important from a recruiter's perspective. Even if you get back, even if the ATS isn't a concern, as humans, we read left to right. Like, think about it from a design perspective. We read left to right. We read bottom, top down, left to right. When you create those columns, you are creating half a second of friction, in how I read normally. And when I'm reading 150 to 200 resumes, I don't want any friction, right? Tom, I feel like this is like one of your videos of like, pointless arguments of design, and let me clear this up. We're talking about half a quarter of a second of friction between scanning in left and right. But as you guys probably all know, that makes a difference. And so I would stick with the single column is, again, that's how we as humans naturally read.
What's funny is I actually just posted a video kind of solving a similar issue about whether you should do multi-column form field
Yes.
or single column. And the scannability is real. There are a lot of different ways that the human will interpret single columns and multi-columns. And so multi-columns do provide a variety of potential confusion.
Yeah, they did like an eye scanning study for recruiters and how they scan resumes. And like that was kind of supportive to this idea that basically what you talked about in that video, Tom, is like the single column has less confusion on where you're scanning and going.
Now, is there any way to balance a resume? So Jessica asked, essentially, how should you balance your resume so that it's, relevant to the ATS, but also relevant to the human who's looking at it?
Yeah, I think everything that we just talked about, like that single column part is to me more human based than it is ATS based. Because again, the more modern ATSs are taking pictures of it, and it's always safer in that sense to have a single column. But again, when I post those videos about because I've done multiple videos on the single column, double column, and it's always funny because in the comments a bunch of recruiters will jump in and they're like, please stick with single column. And it's just the reality of how we want to interact with it. Again, as a recruiter, I have never, ever, ever gone to a hiring manager and said, we should interview this person because of the design of their resume, right? Like that's never been an attribute. And I wouldn't say at the same time, it's not as if I haven't interviewed somebody because they have a double column. It's just a matter of, that again, how we interact with, how we read things is important.
I think also on that, and I find designers miss this a lot, is there's a little bit of what we call resume language, which is a kind of like a combination of what, how, and impact. And anytime I see a designer's resume, I'm like, oh, you poor, beautiful artist, like you did not do this. And instead you just said, help the company design platform versus conducted research user analysis to add 3 layers of green shade on heart icon for Spotify users, leading to an increase of 14% engagements. Like you have got to tie in what you're doing to what happened as a result of what you did.
And if you do that, it won't matter it doesn't matter what I wouldn't say it doesn't matter at all, but like to Dan's point though, like adding the impact, or what I would also refer as the results, will always outweigh everything else. And if you can articulate that really, really well, I don't care what design you put it in.
Oh, Tommy, you went mute.
Sure. Dan Langston, he's asking, is there a good resource that will test your resume against resume parsers?
There's a couple. Dan, I'm laughing because you know where I'm going with this. Yep. There's a platform called JobScan that you can use that has a free version of it. The only caveat I would put, hopefully nobody from JobScan's on this call, is like any freemium product. So it's a freemium product. Their idea or their hope is that you will buy their premium product. So what ends up happening is you go in there, you put your resume, and it will spit out a result of how well your resume aligns and from that perspective. And ultimately, they're trying to get you to buy that. So just utilize it, but know that whatever score they give you is probably a little bit biased. The other simple trick that you should do from a parsing perspective is take your resume and open it up in text or in oh my gosh, what's the word I want to use? Simple text? No. What's the file type? I just blanked.
Plain text?
Plain text. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word plain. Open your resume in plain text. If everything reads from top to bottom, left to right, then you're pretty good from a parsing perspective.
Excellent.
One thing I would add is there's so much free information that you're not aware of. One of the best things to do is to look at, like, if you're a UX designer, type in UX designer in LinkedIn, people, and then just look at a few people's profiles and utilize the keywords and the keyword strings that they use.
Yep. Totally agree with that. And now LinkedIn Microsoft bought LinkedIn. So even now in Word, you can do a very similar exercise. They have like a little resume assistant, but essentially you type in like UX designer and it will scan LinkedIn profiles while you're in Word and pull parts like what you're talking about, Dan. And I would use it directionally, right? Because like not everybody's a great LinkedIn profile writer or resume writer, but like to Dan's point, you can see keywords and things that other people are utilizing on their profile.
I had no idea that was a baked-in feature on Word now. That's actually
It's a new one. Yeah, it's a new one. I'm actually gonna do some content on it. Again, I wouldn't, it's not because you don't know. Like, again, you're not you should use it directionally, but it's a great directional tool.
Next couple of questions are regarding compensation. So Dan Langston asks, is there a good way to get a larger pay increase without having to jump to a different job?
Not really. To be fully honest, most companies do not have this baked into their process yet. Google tried. Like, I don't know if anyone remembers, like 2009, Google gave every employee like a free 11% increase. And then 4 months later, they started to report that they were under market again, because that's how fast the market moves. So you can ask, and the best thing to do is to utilize tools like your comp ratio, which is where you are in range. And we do that by figuring out, we take your salary divided by the midpoint of the range, which is essentially what we assign to mastery. And it's normally a percentage between 80 to 110%. So having conversations about your comp ratio. So typically if you're below 90, you're more likely to get larger increases, try to bring you close to 1. Once you're around 1, it's very difficult to try to get meaningful increases unless you move up a level, but the market will always pay more, honestly.
Yeah. And I'll speak to, being a designer on that side of it. My average lifespan at a company has been about 2 years. And that's because around that time, you start getting hunted by other people, and the offers and the compensation, the opportunities are just so much sweeter than really what you're going to find continuing with your current employer. It's been pretty enticing. So that's been my experience with that as well.
And my one
Can I? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan, please.
Okay. So yeah, my one additional free piece of advice is to try to move to larger companies, and especially in tech, because they consider bonus and equity as equal parts of the compensation. So it's not like fighting for an additional $10,000. You're getting an additional $250,000 through stock if you work, let's say, for Apple, Spotify, Netflix, Uber, or Snap.
And the one thing I would add, just from a recruiter's perspective, and Dan, this is also from you too, but like the idea of 10 years ago, if you jumped around like Tom and I do every 2 years, that was kind of frowned upon. That is not. Actually, it's the opposite now. Like now, if you've been somewhere for 5 years, you actually have the reverse effect where someone's like, oh, are they getting kind of stuck in their own ways, or are they too comfortable, and those kind of things. So that's a general sweeping statement, but the point that I would say is that it is very common and not frowned upon now to be moving around every 2 to 3 years for a lot of reasons. One of them we just talked about.
I'm glad you brought that up, because there was a time in, midway in my career where I wondered if that was frowned upon. And then as I started to be more involved in hiring decisions, I realized, oh, that's actually not that uncommon. I'm glad that you addressed that. Sadie asks, so what about tech ed or ed tech? I think ed tech is kind of what she was asking there. I assume that's on the low salary industry, the low range there. So Dan, you kind of gave that spectrum. This is a question asking about how is the salary range for tech ed? Yeah.
If the company is more focused on tech, it's good. If it's more focused on education, it's generally going to be trend lower. And especially because design for education as a whole is very nuanced, because design and learning are two very different things. And so you don't have a lot of the creative span, I find, within tech ed that you do in other platforms.
These next few questions here, and we're looking good on time. And by the way, if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We are wrapping up on what we're going to accept as questions, because we're coming up to time. But this next round is going to be based on a lack of experience and candidacy requirements. So Trevor asks, what usually sets top candidates apart from others? Is it a direct alignment on previous experience, or is it special things they have done? Is it education?
That's a good question. I think, Tom, do you think that question is like for early professionals or somebody that's been in the workforce? Is it more like a recent graduate?
Maybe if you can speak to both. I know in Trevor's case, he's been in the field for a little while here, but sure. I am curious how that weighs against the years of experience as well.
Yeah, when it comes to actual experience, like the first thing I'm looking for is like, have you done this before, right? Like that's at the end of the day, that is the first thing. Like, have you held this position or a similar position and done what we need to be done, right? And so that is the first thing I look at. Also, I would say once you've been in the workforce, and this is a general sweeping statement, but education, where you went to school, starts to, I don't want to say decrease in value, but is less important in the first scan of your resume. It's not to say your education isn't important. It just means that I'm putting more weight on the most recent experience you had because it's hands-on. It's the actual role. It's the actual title. Again, it's hands-on. So that's where the value, I think, gets put on. When you're a recent student, me personally, and again, I think other recruiters would probably agree, but some may have their own perspective. From a recent student, I'm looking for a well-rounded experience. So I'm looking for somebody that ideally has held some kind of job in high school or in college, has like literally shown up for work, has a work ethic, and that may not even be in your industry or field. But I do like to see that someone's actually, again, has a work ethic. Two, has probably invested in either an internship or a substantial project in their industry or their fields is something else that I would be looking for. And then education in the actual courses you took or the softwares that you learned or those kind of design elements would be also included in that. But Dan, if you want to give your 2 cents on that too, because I know you've hired for a ton of people in this field, what your perspective is.
No, I think you hit it right on the money. In many cases, it's just, have you done this job for similar types of industries or companies? And have you potentially done it better, quicker, faster, or a different approach? I would say for those who are either like in a career plateau, if you're new, you can utilize self skills as a way to try to sell it. So like, let's say you've never worked for a retailer, but you are familiar enough with the concepts, you can demonstrate how a project works and tie that connection. That is something that you can do to help bridge that experience gap.
Nice. And Samia asks, as someone who's working in the industry with a degree in computer information systems and wanting to transition into UI UX, what recommendations do you have in regards to resume and getting a job with essentially zero relevant work experience?
Yeah, so no UI UX experience, but wants to make that transition. I think one is transferable skills, right? So there are probably transferable skills in the project management side of it, or working with other people, or getting influence or buy-in. Like, try to figure out what those transfer, and I'm making some of that up as I go, but like try to figure out what are some of those transferable skills and highlight those as ways that you can make that transition. Then obviously I think, and Tom, I appreciate yours and Tom and Dan's, is like, if you've never done it, like, I get questions all the time is like, should I go get this certificate program or this, additional education? I often will go to LinkedIn and then say like, what are other people that have done that program before, and like, where are they today? And is that program valuable to you? Right. And that's where I think you need to evaluate, should I go take a class at, a General Assembly or something else and invest in that additional education? But if you've never done the role, I'm looking for transferable skills, and I'm looking for some kind of investment in you increasing that skill. And that could be like, I built an app on the side and started to just play around with the idea of building an MVP. Like, you could literally put that as a project. I'm not saying it's going to, change your resume, but I think I would be looking for some kind of skills that you've invested in to enhance your ability to make that change.
So I want to go ahead, Dan.
I was going to say, what I would also add to that, and just seeing it and how it works, and this is a little bit of a nuanced approach, but you essentially have to adopt the mentality of the position that you want. So like, every position generally has a mentality. Like, HR is thinking about people, finance is thinking about money. Engineers typically think about optimization and systems. Stop, Rob. But a UX designer is actually thinking about customer. It's thinking about the experience. So you have to get out of the system thinking of optimization mindset and more into, how does the user interact with this and how can I benefit that? And then just really, as Rob had said, reflect on the skills that you have done and really reconfigure that into the things that a UX designer would value.
And something I'll add to that too, what I'm seeing today, which is very relevant to our team and some recent teams I've worked on, there's, as design has really started to be taken, seriously on the production line of creating software. A big piece of this is recognizing that not only are the designer components important to this process, but really engineers who have an understanding of design is starting to become almost its own role. And this role exists now, and some people kind of eye roll at it, but we're experiencing real pain in the absence of this role. The role is a UX engineer. Somebody who can understand and speak to the need for design systems, but actually understand what it takes to implement those on frameworks like React or Angular, a lot of these frameworks that are coming out. So you can really position yourself, if you're an engineer, a lot of times I see people ask, what do I think about the Google UX certificate? What do I think about these boot camps? And I think they're fine, but I do think they benefit you even more so if you already are working in the field and you're on the engineering side and you're making that transition. Doing something like a Google that UX certification might actually be pretty beneficial, because you can then say, I have a background in engineering. I've got at least a certification here, so I can kind of tie these together. And then if you go to a company that's currently working on a design system, and design systems are becoming a big part of this field now. And I really think over the next 5 years are going to shape a lot of how we build software. And so if you can come in and be that UX engineer, or whatever they're calling that role, there's a big need for that. A big need. You're going to solve a big pain. So there's definitely some room to bridge that, and it might just come at the cost of putting some time into that Google UX certification, and then getting your first role helping out with like a design system. So I'd look for that too. It's still somewhat niche, but it's a huge topic last year and this year. Huge topic. Anita asks, how to approach a resume when changing your career and have no work experience. So we kind of spoke to this, but this is maybe more on the resume side of the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably where I'll give the caveat to the like summary section at the top of your resume, and I'm not. This is where an opportunity where you can give 2 sentences, usually maybe 3. That's like how you're making a career change, and again, highlighting the transferable skills. You have to at least connect some of the dots, or at least try to connect some of those dots to, I think, really have a chance at making that career change. I will say honestly, the most effective way to make a career change is like networking, though, is having somebody else put you out there to say, I think this person can make this transfer. I think I've seen them, with these skills, and I think they're applicable here, is honestly the way that I would describe, or the best way I would approach making those transferables, making that career change.
What are your guys' thoughts on cover letters?
Oh,
it was great talking to everybody.
yeah, bye.
There is so much chatter right now, Dan. Like, I mean, today I saw like 3 polls on LinkedIn about it, and it's amazing to me because there are a bunch of people out there talking about. Here's the thing: anybody that says that you should have a cover letter, make sure they're not trying to sell you cover letters. That's the first thing I would say.
90% right out.
My belief is that most recruiters aren't reading cover letters. And so unless it is asked of you, I don't recommend doing them. They are a massive time, can suck, and they just are, the ROI is really, really low. If you are going to do them though, or you are being asked to do them, please get out of this templated world that we live in where there's a bunch of templates. You can take a template as directional or motivational, but get away from that completely. The only template I would use from a cover letter is utilize bullets, like make it skimmable, right? Make it very short and make it skimmable. That's if you're going to use it, that's what I would highly, highly recommend. The funny reason, here's a really quick thing though, why cover letters exist is because you used to mail your resume in and they didn't know what job you were applying to. And your cover letter was designed to tell the person that they was receiving the mail what role you were applying to. So if you think about that for a second, it's like, that's how old and arbitrary that thing is.
I think the only value cover letters ever add is the question from before for someone looking to transfer a skill set. That's the one case where I think a cover letter is actually useful. I know I've only had 5 years of experience in engineering, but I've worked really closely with UX and UI. I've been finding it fascinating. I've been shadowing UX and UI people, and I'm really excited to take what I've learned in engineering and apply it into a UX UI function.
We're going to get into a few portfolio questions here. Sorry, Rob, did you have something to add?
No, you're good.
Okay. We're going to get into a couple portfolio questions here in just a second. I am going to say that portfolios are a big topic in themselves, and I'm certainly going to do a small Q&A on my TikTok after this event, and there may even be a portfolio dedicated event next month. I'm getting a lot of questions about it, but we're going to answer some of those questions. But before we do, someone, Sound the Verb, has asked, for people just out of school, do you recommend including essentially the spec project details if they have no professional experience to show? So that might be like more of a resume. Should they include spec work on their resume? And we'll segue into portfolio.
Give me a little bit more clarity on spec work, meaning like project, like individual, like
school project.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think building I'm not, I want to touch really quick on portfolios, Tom, if I can, from a recruiter's perspective, because I literally just had a conversation about this with my team. My team is literally hiring a senior product designer for a client of ours. I am not a designer. I know how to like interview them, right? But I can't personally evaluate your work, right? And so having a portfolio though in your resume or like on the top of your resume, like that first resume I showed had a personal website or something that allows me to go see your work is extremely important, because as a recruiter, most recruiters aren't that great at evaluating the design part, but we want to be able to quickly show to a hiring manager, this is the person that actually has the design eye, what you have. And so making that really easy all in one place is going to be extremely valuable. And I know it sounds intuitive or obvious, but it's not. And just keep that lens in mind. Not every recruiter has a design eye or aesthetic, if you will, to evaluate design.
Yeah, I've never thought of it from that angle. So the recruiter is really looking for a check in the box. Do they have a portfolio that I can show, and then they'll allow the others to evaluate the quality.
Yeah, and like functionality or industry, and Dan can speak to more on the industry's perspective, but like if I'm looking for a designer that's done mobile apps, as a recruiter, I'm like, have you done mobile apps? What platforms have you worked on? Function, is it B2B? Is it B2C? Like I'm checking those design boxes, but again, from an aesthetic or maybe aesthetic's not even the right word, but like I'm not evaluating your individual design skills. The person that you're going to report to is going to do that, but I want to very quickly and easily be like, here's what I found out. Here's their portfolio or their examples. You can make that call.
And so that kind of segues into this question from Jeet, who asks, any tips on presenting your portfolio to a recruiter? In my experience, and I'll quickly just add to that, I haven't actually presented to the recruiter, though they have found me through the portfolio. So, knowing that what you just said, that you're not evaluating it to that level, are there things when it comes to the actual portfolio that are good to have from your lens?
Yeah, and I will throw one caveat. Dan, you can speak to this too. Like, did you guys at Spotify, did you have a recruiter that was only focused on design folks or design and engineering?
Yeah, absolutely.
You did? Yeah, so I think the larger organizations may, to my point, like where I was like, we don't. Some of the smaller companies or the agencies may not, but the larger organizations may. So, Tom, when you said a recruiter found you, that recruiter actually may have this skill that I just said they don't have. So I think it depends on the size of the organization and the investment that they have made in that job family. But just know that you may get a recruiter that doesn't.
So you're saying, so some of these larger teams actually have design recruiters and they're trained what to look for those portfolios.
Yep. Yeah. But you don't know that. So like, that's where I was giving that caveat is like, know that you may be talking to a recruiter that can't make that call. And both of you are saying that you've worked with recruiters that have, so they're out there. It's just a matter of you may not understand, or you may not know that. So, having that understanding helps. Tom, did I lose you?
Nope, I'm here. Sorry. I'm going through a couple of the remaining stuff. So what I'll say is there's some really good portfolio questions that Virtue has sent our way. These are big topics to unpack. So please join me after this. I'm also going to, by the way, I realized I did a poor job of sharing your socials here. I'm going to share that near the end just a moment. But again, Rob is, your handle is on TikTok, we're talking about, @Rob_Kinsella, and I'll put that up here. Dan, you are @Dan_from_HR. Again, I will visualize that in just a sec. Some last questions with the last few minutes we have. Kutri asks, I am a former firefighter, EMT, and a self-taught UI UX designer. How do I combine those to stand out against more experienced junior candidates?
Wow.
I was like, wow,
that's not an experience that you want to combine. I would say, like, I'm kind of like off the top of my head, I'm thinking high pressure for sure. The ability to remain very cool under pressure, as well as prioritization. Like that to me is kind of like the obvious call outs, but Jesus Christ, what a mix.
Yeah, I would, to Dan's point, like those are great attributes to, I would love, like, if I got that resume and it was well organized, I would be like, let's talk, right? Because that is
so fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. Like you bring a unique background. So I think actually the uniqueness of it, I think it's just about packaging it, right? And I think if we talk about like your resume again, like the most relevant experience is you're self-taught. So what does that mean? Is there a project that you can show us or talk about? And that should be at the top of your resume. And then like a skills and highlights, right? And to like take some of Dan's recommendations and say like prioritization, right? And give us one bullet of what that means for you and how you can make that transferable. Because your resume will feel very different. It'll be very like skill based at the top and attributes, and your professional experience down below. But I think again, I would interview.
Yeah, and I can kind of speak to that too. When I first started getting into the field, I was coming from a Marine Corps background, and so I was trying to lean on that because I didn't have a lot else to lean on in the time. And it was a Marine Corps infantry background, completely a far cry away from the tech and the design space. And so what I would do is I had that, and I would showcase that. And here was my experience over the last decade of doing that. It did get recognized and called out sporadically. In some cases, people actually said they reached out because they appreciated that. And I think the same would go for kind of a firefighter in EMT background. But I do recommend, at least this is what I did, I do recommend still you need to be highlighting and focusing on the role that you're trying to get. And so that still is, while some of those skills are very, very good things, and they'll make for great parts of the conversation, and you can certainly find, like you were saying, to the high pressure, high stress environment, that stuff is helpful. You do still want to emphasize the things that you're working on that will make you a good candidate for that job right now. And so I still include the Marine Corps piece, but it's tucked away. And I really have started to de-emphasize it. And maybe that's just because I've gotten more experience over time. Because I do think still what seems to play the best, or at least in my experience, has been emphasizing the skills over, things from a different industry. So I that's just wanted to share what my experience has been on that. And yeah.
That's awesome, by the way. I had no idea that you were a Marine.
While back, feels like a lifetime ago. Let me look in here and see if we've got a few more. We've got about 4 minutes. So, and by the way, everyone, great questions. I hope that there's been some value here. We will be posting this whole interview and the whole presentation in the Discord probably tomorrow once it's all wrapped up. I'm going to do some few edits. But what are some good questions? So Jessica asked, what are some good questions to ask during an interview? Right. Curious what you guys think about that.
Ask if there's any reservations that the interview.
No, Dan.
No one has that. So honestly speaking, I come from a very unique place of privilege, because as my role as an HRBP, I'm consistently meeting with leaders after the interview process, and we make our decision. And I'll typically only get involved with like director level and above, but I have so many repeated data points of like, what was the thing that made this person the choice? What we've started to see is a trend, especially over the last 3 to 4 years, is what I would call a more focus on connection-based questions, humble brag questions, and relationship building questions. So the reason I say don't ever ask anything like, do you have any hesitations about me, is because you just spoke about yourself for 45 minutes. And now you're asking the interviewer to keep talking about yourself. So it's like, it's like being on a date, being like, oh, but enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? And instead, what you want to do is really use those questions as a time to demonstrate how you understand the role, to fulfill any intellectual curiosity you have about the team, but essentially use that time as a way to show the hiring manager through questions you understand what the company is, what their voice is on social media, how they're presenting themselves, and what your role is going to be within that team.
Fantastic.
I have a couple quick ones that are, I would say, for more junior folks that you can apply to a lot of different roles, like really quickly. Tom, did I lose you?
I'm still here. I'm
okay.
still here. I'm sorry. I'm sharing screen. I wanted to just make sure we got this up, but go ahead and continue.
No, I think 3 really low-hanging fruit questions that I think that you can utilize, especially early on in your career, are, one is, I like to tie a lot of the interview is focused on the day-to-day tactics of the job. And I like to try to ask a question that attaches the job to the broader organization, right? So something like you could say is so we're heading into the back half of 2021, like what are some really big initiatives that the organization is focused on? And how does this team and this role align to those strategic initiatives? And what the question does is it kind of shows like, I can see what I like to call like the forest and the trees. right? The trees are the day-to-day blocking and tackling of the role, and the forest is the strategy of the broader organization or broader team. And by asking that question, you're kind of giving the optics of like, I can see both of those things. I think another really great question that I love to ask that goes really, really well with interviewers is, if you think about the dynamics of an interview, to Dan's point, like it's 45 minutes of like talking about you, which is great, and that's the point of the interview. But there's a really subtle moment that you can ask the interviewer, which is like, what was like a deciding factor for you, or like an aha moment when you're like, this is the organization that you wanted to work for? And this is a great question, because when you flip it to the interviewer and give them a minute, like people love talking about themselves. So if you give yourself that opportunity to have them articulate, they love it. And then also you get some really valuable information, because the interviewer is going to hopefully say something like, well, the opportunity for growth was amazing here. The culture is incredible. So like you'll get a really good perspective from the interviewer of why they joined and why this may be a good opportunity. And then the last question that I absolutely love that everybody can ask is, what is the biggest challenge for anybody coming into this role? It's a broad question, but it works really well because it shows the interviewer that you see yourself in the seat already, which people want to know, like, are you interested in this role? And it shows that you're so interested in it that you want to overcome the challenges right away. And that question actually just like lands really, really well with interviewers. So those are all kind of a little bit generic, but those work really well for early professionals or students.
Excellent. And so I will get to one last question, and then we're going to wrap here. And Danielle asks this, and hi, Danielle, good to see you. She asks, hey, everyone, I'm in animation, not UX, but this is the first time in a long time that I've been in the job hunt. She needs to apply places. And essentially, her question is, when you're going through the numbers game of applying to multiple different places, and you get asked the question in some of these, and I've experienced this, why do you want this job? Why are you good for this job? What's the interest? Especially when your work is solid, and at this point, it's a numbers game. What are some of the better answers to give in those scenarios?
Dan, why don't you go ahead?
I would say the premier lines of answers that generate the most positive outcomes are value-based. So demonstrating that you understand what the role does. And I've seen time and time again where someone is given a chance because they're saying, I know I've never worked within video games, but I've worked within music, and here's this transferable skill set. And I've gone on your social media, I see your design, I see your target voice, I see your reach. That value is one of the best trends of answers to give.
Yep, I totally agree. I think it's about understanding the role and the value you can bring to that role or the team or the problem that they're trying to solve is the key. And it sounds easy when we say it out loud, but it's honestly it's missed a lot of the time. And so taking that moment, and even sometimes it's about like jotting it down before the interview, just writing out like based on the job description, based off of maybe the recruiter interview or whatever, like this is what I understand, and this is how I'm going to connect the value that I can bring to that.
Excellent. Well, that's going to wrap up this the first community event here. Everyone, thank you for attending. I hope everyone got some value out of this. I learned some things here too, so it was pretty fantastic. Stay with me, Rob and Dan, for just about a couple minutes here. I'm going to close this out. I will be going live on TikTok not long after this. For any questions that I'm capable of answering, you can come in there, and I'll try to answer those on the live. So that'll be about 10 or 15. But other than that, thanks everyone, and I will be seeing you all soon.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, let me